Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming to today's STAR seminar, How Reflective Parenting Can Improve Your Clinical Work, by Dr. Regina Pally. And I'm going to introduce her in just a moment, but before I do that, just a couple of logistics. So today's seminar will be filmed and placed on YouTube following the presentation. The videos are unlisted, but the link is available on our NFRC website. And all questions, if we have questions either during or at the end of the talk, those will be part of the recording. A member of our team will come by with this microphone, so please just wait until you get that microphone to ask your question so that everyone can hear. And also, the questions and answer will be part of the recording, so if you prefer for your question to not be recorded, just wait until the seminar is completely over to ask. And also there's a STAR seminar evaluation form, and please complete that at the end of the talk. That's really helpful for us. And if you'd like one CEU, there's a second evaluation for you to complete as well. Okay, so now to introduce our speaker. Dr. Pally is a psychiatrist, and she's the founder and co-director of the Center for Reflective Communities. She's also the author of the book, The Reflective Parent, How to Do Less and Relate More with Your Kids. And she's a member of the New Center for Psychoanalysis. Her work integrates research in attachment, child development, interpersonal relationships, and neuroscience. And she believes that the same principles of reflective parenting that promote healthy development in children can also be used to improve clinical skills of therapists with their client or patients. So we're really, really excited to have her here. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. And I also want to thank the team here at the Nathanson Family Resiliency Center, Blair Paley, Catherine Mogul, Jolie Delia, and Claire Garospi for their excellent work. We're doing a randomized controlled study on the effectiveness of reflective parenting. So this will be our first chance to get become an evidence-based practice, which I don't know if you know, but in the community, that's the gold standard for being able to bring programs into the community. So let me just give you a snippet about who our organization is. Is this going to work? How do I move this, advance the slides forward? It is, but it's not. Okay, well, I'll keep talking and someone will help me figure out how to do that. So the mission of our organization is to promote healthy child development by strengthening the parent-child relationship using a mechanism that targets the parent's reflective capacity. And we have created a parent group model which targets enhancing parent reflective function. And we bring that program out into the community by partnering with agencies, organizations, even schools that are serving low-income and at-risk families. And what we do is we train mental health people working in those community sites as to how to run the program. Yes? Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay. So this is an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience and neurobiology of reflective parenting, or why, at least to emphasize why it's so important. I'm going to talk about what reflective parenting is, why it matters, how it applies to all relationships. I'm going to specifically focus a lot on the issue of regulating children's distress and regulating parents' distress and the role of reflective capacity in that. And then I'm going to talk about the value of balancing sort of the warm, empathic side of parenting with the more sort of firm limit-setting side of parenting. And then throughout somewhere in this, I will also clarify some distinctions that people have about what does it mean to be reflective versus mindful, what's mindfulness versus reflective function, and how do we distinguish empathy from validation? These are some of the things people always want to know about. Okay, so probably the biggest thing I like to say is that being reflective is embedded in our DNA. And what I mean is that we have DNA and we're born with that controls for the development of parts of the brain that eventually are capable of being reflective. So we have brain tissue dedicated for reflective function. The second thing I like to say is that encoded into the DNA is the child automatically looks to the parent, the primary caregiver, and seeks out a relationship. That's, again, built into the DNA. You don't have to teach a child how to do that. They're born doing that. Another thing I like to emphasize is that the wiring, we know, of course, children's brains aren't fully developed, but the specific wiring that they undergo is experience dependent. And the wiring of the child's brain occurs in the context of the experience they have with their caretakers, their parents and other caretakers. So in a sense, the child is internalizing the relationship they have with a parent. How the parent relates to the child not just wires the child's brain, but ultimately becomes how the child relates to themselves. One of the things I like to say is the role of the parent is to make themselves obsolete. And what I mean by that is everything we do for children eventually becomes something they're going to have to do for themselves, right? So the way the parent regulates the child is going to become how the child regulates themselves. So the fundamental biology of all this is embedded in the fact that human beings are the most social creatures on Earth. Our very survival is dependent on our social relationships. And therefore, in some ways, one of the main roles of the parent is to teach the child how to be a competent social individual. It turns out that everything you need to know about how to be a competent social individual is actually what you need to know in order to learn, do well in school, well, obviously get along with other people, but also to self-regulate. And so what I mean by what does it mean to be a competent social person, all those things the parent is teaching the child, like you have to share, the world doesn't focus just on you, other people have to take their turns, things like that. That's part of the parent-child relationship and learning how to be a competent social individual. Those are the key factors in children also developing self-control over their emotions, their impulses, and their behaviors. And we know that that is a major key to ultimate high functioning later on in life. So this is a picture of me and my toddler son, and I was pregnant with twins. And I use this picture to illustrate the fundamental social nature. And my 18-month-old says to me, next time I'm in your tummy, I want to be in there with someone else. Giving the talk is easy. The technology is the hard part.
You have to make sure it's on the air.
Oh, on that air. I didn't realize that that's what you were pointing out. Okay. So what is reflective parenting? Just in a nutshell, I like to say it's a relationship-based approach to raising children that targets the reflective capacity in human beings. Being reflective is, it's going to sound pretty technical when I say it, but I'm going to reassure you later on that it's quite an ordinary capacity. Being reflective technically means being able to recognize that everybody has a mind and that everybody's behavior is linked or triggered or motivated in one way or another by something going on in their mind. And what goes on in the mind? Well, we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have intentions, we have goals. And so when parents are reflective, they're able to realize that their child's behavior is linked to something going on inside their child's mind, but that their own behavior toward the child is related to something going on inside their mind. Okay? Turns out that when parents are reflective, children tend to just do better in life in all the domains that we care about. They do better physically, socially, emotionally, and academically. And they're more likely to stay in school and more likely to be able to be employed later on. Now, why does being reflective matter so much? Well, it helps parents to be more emotionally responsive to their children, which is what we want, of course. It's associated with secure attachment. It's protective against growing up with adverse child experiences, and it's protective against the intergenerational transmission of trauma and violence. It helps parents be less intrusive and less hostile. Now, so it has like a lot of positive impact on child development. Now, the thing is, children aren't born knowing how to be reflective. I mean, we have a brain region which is going to eventually, in the brain of the child, is eventually going to develop and mature and be able to be reflective, but the child is not born knowing how to be reflective, just like they're not born knowing how to speak. How do we learn how to speak? Well, we have to have people who speak to us, right? So a child learns to be reflective because somebody relates to them in a reflective way. And that's the whole point of this. Again, everything the parent's capacity is going to be internalized by the child so that the child will have that for themselves. Now, we know of clinical situations where people are impaired in their reflective capacity. I bet you could name them yourself, but I'll tell you that borderline personality disorder, this is one of the sine qua non fundamental deficits in borderline personality disorders, impairment in reflective capacity. So we can see what happens when people aren't reflective, and certainly people who are on the spectrum also have impairments in reflective capacity. I want to reassure you, most people actually are reflective. But the one thing, and I know especially here this is relevant, people who've suffered trauma also can have impairments in their reflective capacity, which is why it's such an important population to work with. I think I've pretty much already said most of this, but one of the things I like to emphasize is that again, the importance of self-regulation, the important component of having social skills for communicating, and you're going to see in a few minutes why being reflective is so important in terms of communicating. Well, one of the things I really always emphasize to parents is the importance of teaching children coping skills. It's wonderful to be able to comfort and soothe and reassure and contain and all of that stuff. Really important, and that's, the child internalizes that. But it's also important to teach children, and I like to even talk about it in an interactive way with the child, teaching children coping skills. And how they can begin to discover ways that they themselves can learn strategies for managing their big feelings, I like to say, all the negative emotions. Everybody's okay with easy emotions, nice emotions. It's the big, difficult emotions, the negative ones, like disappointment, failure, rejection, hurt. Okay. So actually, I find that the best way for me, I guess maybe I'm going to plug this into myself now. The best way for me to illustrate what it means to be reflective is, I'm going to demonstrate it. Could I have a volunteer? Anybody want to volunteer? I promise I won't hurt you. Yes, thank you. Would you come up? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Move this over here. All right, is she in the film? Okay. All right, so I want the audience to tell me what I'm doing. Okay, thank you very much. Can anyone tell me what I was doing? Well, could you tell me what I was doing?
Offering you an
I was offering you an apple. Excellent, thank you. You can sit
Am I
down.
all done?
Yes, thank you. You did great. Okay, that is a demonstration of how reflective function works. I asked the question, what am I doing? Right? And she said, she went right to my mind. She didn't say, you're sticking out your arm there with an apple sitting on it, right? She went right to my mind. And that's how reflective function works. It's the natural way that we understand and make sense of other people's behavior. And I'd like to add that talking from the perspective of the brain is a motor action. And so it's the same way that we make sense of what other people are saying to us. We don't react to the words. We don't react to the action. We react to the meaning that we ascribe to the action. That's what being reflective is about. Now, there's some people, if they're not reflective at all, have to learn that connection. But for the vast majority of people, they're already doing that. Happens outside conscious awareness, just like most things in the brain. 99% of the brain operates completely outside of our conscious awareness, so does reflective function. Now, the point I want to make here is that my volunteer, I don't know your name, but Natalie, thank you, my gracious volunteer, she not only went right to my emotion, she responded automatically. She put out her hand. She was ready to take my apple that I was offering to her. She was so convinced that I was offering her the apple. But if we do an exercise here, I'd like to ask you, could I have had any other intentions? Yeah, of course. I see a bunch of people shaking their heads. I could have had the intention of just showing her what a pretty apple I bought this morning at the farmer's market. Right? Oh, isn't that a pretty apple? Right? Or, and this is where we get into, people who have had trauma. Someone else, a traumatized parent, might think I might be just about to throw it at her, right? Or I might be taunting her and saying, I have a pretty apple and you don't. Or, yeah, I look like I'm offering you the apple, but I'm really going to take it back. So these are all the various possibilities. And being reflective requires you to recognize that there are always other perspectives. Whatever you think is going on with your patient, whatever reason you ascribe to why they're doing whatever they're doing, you may be right, but you may not be. Right? I like to liken reflective capacity to a perceptual ability. We have vision for seeing things, we have hearing for hearing things. Reflective capacity is our perceptual system into the mind of others and into our own mind. It's as if we can see inside the mind. The dilemma is, of course, the mind is hidden, so we can't really see inside. It's like an X-ray. You can't really get an exact idea of what's going on inside. And so being reflective requires us to have this open-mindedness about things. It could be this, it could be that. I come home and I think I'm just telling my husband, oh, the kitchen light bulb went out. And I feel like I'm just sharing information. And he gets annoyed at me because he feels like I'm saying, you didn't fix the light bulb in the kitchen, right? Okay, so this is how it works, and this is the same, so it applies to all relationships, it applies to your relationships with your clients, it applies to parents' relationships with their children, this awareness. We have to learn how to be reflective, even though it's natural and inbuilt and non-conscious and automatic and all that. The reason we have to learn it is because we have to learn how our mind works. Eating is pretty natural and normal, but we don't always do it in the healthiest fashion. So I think of reflective capacity in that same way. Okay, so this is what I've just said. I've just already defined for you that we each have a separate mind. Behavior is linked to what's in the mind. It's true for the child as well as the parent. And we want parents to be responsive to the inner meaning of the child's behavior with the awareness that what they're responding to may be accurate or not. And this is And of course, if they have to be aware of be responsive in a way to what's going on inside of them as well. They may be angry. They know they're not supposed to be angry, but they feel angry. They have to deal with that. Now, this is the biggest question I get from people, is if it's so natural, why do we misunderstand each other so often? Why do we have so much conflict? We have this natural ability to understand people's minds. Well, it turns out that, and this is just how the brain works. That's why I love knowing about the brain. This is just how the brain works. As soon as we have a perception, like we make an inference about the reason why someone is doing what they're doing, we automatically assume we're right. We automatically assume it's the only way to think about it. And this is because it's all happening outside our conscious awareness. So we can't correct it if it stays outside of conscious awareness. We think we're right. I think it's the only way to think about it. The other thing is, as soon as someone behaves in any particular way, we automatically have an emotional response to that. And then what's going on is we are responding to our own emotional response rather than what's going on inside the other person, even if it's your child. So when, little Natalie, borrow your name, when little Natalie refuses to brush her teeth when her mother asks for it, Natalie's mom has to think about, why is Natalie refusing to? Well, if she is responding in an automatic way, she may automatically assume it's because Natalie doesn't respect her. So then that's where she's going to be responding from. Or she may automatically feel very hurt or helpless or rejected or whatever, and then she's going to be responding from that place. And unless she's aware and understands that process, it's going to be hard for her to be open-minded and flexible. And that's why, I'll tell you, and you can look at that for a second, but, and that's why one of the big components of the reflective parenting model is to teach parents about how this operates automatically, but that in high stress situations, when there's a lot of intense emotion, when there's a lot of misunderstanding and conflict, when parents feel very stressed or they get a sense things aren't going right with their kid, that's when we have to slow down. I like to tell parents, push the pause button and bring your reflective capacity into conscious awareness, because it's only in your conscious awareness of your reflective capacity that you're going to have the opportunity to be more open-minded, more flexible, and see alternative possibilities. So I like to remind people that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and so is everything else. Okay? So we create stories in our own minds about what's going on with other people. And then we believe our stories. And we react to the world as if our stories are correct. And this is because the brain actually creates all of our reality. Reflective parenting isn't any different than any other aspect of reality. Our reality of other people and why they're doing what they're doing is something their own brain creates. And it creates that from all kinds of things, like what we're feeling, what our past history was, including taking in the actions of other people. So if you need any convincing that it's your brain that creates your reality, rather than you actually perceiving reality as it is, because this is how parents feel. My child is lazy, right? My child is a bad child. My child, doesn't respect me. These become concrete realities for people, rather than them recognizing this is a little kind of made-up story they've created in their mind about who their child is. So, if you need any convincing about this, there's two optical illusions. The one on the right over here is a static drawing. But I'm pretty confident that all of you see motion in it. And this is a creation of your brain. The brain takes the static drawing, but from the perspective of your brain, it's actually moving. Your brain is created, your brain does some activity that adds the motion to it, even though there's no motion there. This picture on your right is a two-dimensional drawing. But again, your brain perceives this as three-dimensional. You almost feel like you could grab that little cube in there. This is how the brain operates. And this is why why reflective parenting is so important for parents to realize that what they're experiencing may or may not be what is happening. And I talk to clinicians the same way. I say, what you think is going on may be or not be what is going on. And only if you're aware of that and are open to sort of seeing things from different perspectives will you have a better grasp. I mean, I feel like I'm a walking advertisement for the value of reflective parenting to clinical work, because when I met reflective parenting, it really enhanced my clinical work with all my patients, not just with people who were parents. It even improved my own parenting. Okay, so this is just, sort of practicing what I've just been talking about. In each of these cases, you see the behavior. This is little boy on the right over there, and you could probably describe his behavior. And I know before I've even said anything, you've already made some assumptions about why he's looking that way, right? You probably think either he's sad, or he's scared, or he's lonely, or something like that, right? And that's just what we automatically do. The girl in the middle, you see her behavior, you automatically made up a little story about, she's saying to her mom, whatever. So she's either impatient or annoyed, or, mom probably said, no, you can't go to that party or sleep over or whatever. You create a whole story. Now, this one over here, it's a little ambiguous. Right? And we don't know. And maybe different people in the room have had different interpretations of why this boy is behaving the way he is. Some might think he's playing hide and go seek, right? Some might think he's running away from his dad who he's terrified of, right? Trying to hide. Depends on where you're coming from as to what assumptions you're going to make. The point about reflective parenting is that we embrace the ambiguity of life. Life is, in large part, ambiguous. We don't always know. Parents pressure themselves to always know what the right answer is, but we can't always know what the right answer is. And that's one of the things we really emphasize about reflective parenting. And in the clinical situation, my friend, didn't call me back. I know she hates me, right? Or I'm sure I offended her, or whatever assumption the person makes. And we don't really know. Your friend didn't call you back. It's a very ambiguous situation. And we're always trying to teach people that that's all it is. You can't really know for certain. And we help people recognize, why are they jumping to the conclusion they're jumping to? Like, so for example, I'm standing up here in front of you as an audience, and if I see somebody in the back, like looking at their cell phone or rifling through their purse, I might automatically jump to the conclusion that I'm boring you. Now, I might be boring you, I don't know. But I tend to jump to that conclusion when that kind of thing happens. And then I have to, and then my impulse is to sort of maybe do something funny, like tell a joke or something like that when I feel like I'm boring people. And then I have to sort of stop myself and think, oh, wait a second. That's what I always do. I always assume I'm boring people because I had this really critical mom who, never liked anything I had to say. So that's the reflective process, and that's what we're trying to teach our patients, not just the parents that we serve. Now I use this slide to bring home the point that everybody has a different perspective. And this is important in families in particular because you might have two parents. Maybe you have two parents, or you have a single mom and her mom who's helping her with the kids. Everybody comes to a different conclusion. So here's little twin boys, and Alex is grabbing the pacifier out of Connor's mouth, right? But Connor's mother thinks it's kind of adorable and cute, and Connor's father thinks he's being aggressive. I mean, that Alex is being aggressive with Connor. They come to it with different approaches. And we try to help couples and families realize that each person comes to the situation with a different interpretation of the matter, and that they're understanding that your interpretation is valid for you and my interpretation is valid for me, and trying to help families recognize that rather than have to feel like you're right and I'm wrong. Now, I've emphasized this again, but I want to emphasize, I've talked about this before, but I want to emphasize it again. The only way to help people keep their reflective capacity operating well is to help people understand that under stress, our reflective thinking goes out the window. I mean, I'm a really reflective person, but under enough stress, I will become non-reflective. What happens when we're non-reflective is we're just reactive. You know, we just react with our gut. We just react to the behavior. Stop it! Stop it! You know, that kind of, or, you know, stop your crying. If you don't stop your crying, I'll give you something to cry about. That's coming from a reactive place. And we're helping people recognize that when they're noticing tension in themselves, this is like a little red flag to identify a moment. Again, push the pause button. Bring your reflective capacity into conscious awareness. Slow down. And in all of our parenting groups, actually, we do a mindfulness exercise. This is where I'm going to. So mindfulness is that capacity to be in the present moment, to have non-judgmental thinking about the thoughts. Just allow your thoughts to, just notice your thoughts, not grab onto them. Be in the present moment. And it really is helpful for reducing stress. But I differentiate mindful awareness, which is designed to help with compassion and empathy, from being reflective. I like to think of reflection as a little more sometimes like having to struggle with the devil almost, you know, to sort of step out of a situation. You kind of center yourself in the present moment, but a lot of times you're actually having this conversation with yourself, like I had a conversation with myself before about why I feel like I'm boring people. Being reflective is something we do sometimes. Get into the moment in order to be reflective, and then step out of the moment to figure out what's kind of going on. Because a lot of aspects of being reflective have to do with not just understanding what's going on inside my child, what's the reason for why they're behaving the way they are, or what's the reason for why I'm behaving the way I am, but also this capacity to make links back and forth. So, for example, I'll show you a case of that afterwards, but it's this making links of how we are mutually influencing each other, how their behavior is influencing me and how my behavior is influencing them. Oh yeah, so this is the example. Now, reflective capacity is something that actually can be measured. We have a standardized interview that measures a person's reflective capacity in connection with their child. And I want to point out also that our reflective capacity, because it's so susceptible to stress, fluctuates. But we can measure it, and it's measured on roughly a 10-point scale. And I like to reassure parents they only need to be a 5. But actually, if you have a more stressful family situation, or if you have a child with some special needs of any sort, you probably need to be a 6 or a 7. You need to be a little more reflective. In my book, so we have our organization and we have our parenting group model that we use, train people in schools and agencies and clinics. But I wrote my book for the general public so that all parents can know about it. And in my book, I came up with this concept of the you, me, we relationship. So in every relationship, There's a you, a me, and a we. You is you, me is me, and we is the way we mutually influence each other. And we always have to be aware of all three levels of the relationship. The you, the me, and the we. Sometimes the we is actually the most important. So let me talk about linkages in this picture. So mom, you can see they're both exasperated with each other. They've all each gone to their corner. The girl is thinking, oh, my mom is impossible, and the mom's thinking, oh, my daughter's impossible. So what's going on here? So fortunately, the mom is reflective. She teaches a reflective parenting class at Santa Monica High School. And she's thinking, oh, my daughter's impossible. I'm trying to get her to do her homework, and she never does her homework. And it's a mess, and I can never get her to do her homework, and she yells at me, and blah, 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 blah. And then she starts to think, okay, what did we talk about in my reflective parenting class? What we talked about is my influence on her. So what's been going on lately is I've been working more than usual. So I'm more stressed when I come home. So what happens to me when I'm more stressed? I'm a little more impatient. And I think what's going on is my impatience is coming out in me being a little more hostile about how I deal with her and her homework, and being more reactive and just telling her, do your homework, instead of, probably with my teenage daughter, I should be sort of having a dialogue with her about how we can figure this out together. So that's the reflective process of making those kinds of links. And that's what you see parents being able to finally do when they kind of get a hold of this idea. I mean, one of the reasons I really emphasize, I like parents to, it's wonderful if I have a great book. It's beautiful, wonderful to read, it's easy to read. But I often tell parents, it's good to read my book, but really the way you're going to really learn how to do this is by going through the process. Everything we need to learn, we have to do it. We have to practice. We have to put in effort. We have to persevere at it. We have to practice. We have to repeat it. And that's what parents get to do over the course of 12 weeks. Often they're skeptical at the beginning. But once they make that commitment to going through the whole process, they really internalize this. And the nice thing about reflective parenting is we're not teaching parents literally how to put their kid to sleep or how to get their kids to eat healthy foods. We are talking about those kinds of things, or how to get them to do their homework. We are talking about those kinds of things. But we're giving them this reflective tool, which actually will help them no matter what they're doing. I like to say, give a man a fish, he'll eat for one day, but teach a man how to fish. This is more like teaching a parent how to fish. Okay. I like to emphasize that reflective parenting is not permissive parenting. And the reason I emphasize this is because there are communities, particularly in the African American community or other communities, where parents really are worried that if their child does not obey them, that child may get in trouble with police or with the law or some other authority figure. And so they often come to us and think, oh, you're just being so nice to kids. You're being so loving and supportive and understanding. And, we don't have the luxury of just doing that. So I'd like to emphasize the incredible value that reflective parenting can have on a parent being able to set limits, not just age-appropriate limits, but to set limits in a firm, confident way, in a way that's not harsh or aggressive or hostile. Setting limits does not mean controlling. One of the things I find with parents, and no matter what socioeconomic group you come from, parents often have this inner feeling that my child's not going to listen to me. It makes them feel helpless. And once you get into that mindset, you're more wishy-washy about the limits you set. You're not anticipating someone's going to listen to you. You may be a little more tentative about how you set your limits. The other thing I found, so parents who've been raised by people who don't respect them as a child are going to assume their children aren't going to respect them. So that's going to interfere with how they set limits. The other thing I find, of course, in more affluent communities, you have the problem of parents I don't want to hurt my child's feelings. I don't want my child to think I'm mean. And so those parents are a little more reluctant to set limits. And then they blow up because they didn't set any limits and the kids act up. So we always are emphasizing the importance of setting limits, and this is where I get into the difference between empathy and validation. Empathy is something to the effect of, I know what you're feeling. You know, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Validating is, I can understand why you're feeling that way. So I understand that the reason you're kicking and screaming is because I told you couldn't have another ice cream. Okay? You're not empathizing with how sad and upset they feel, right? You're validating that you understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling. It makes sense to you. But you still can't have an ice cream, right? And the point is that a major role of the parent is to regulate children's distress. And we all know it feels better that even if someone doesn't agree with us, at least they know what we are feeling. We all want that. We want people to acknowledge that we have a right to feel what we feel. And children are no different. So I get it. You don't like that. Or the other thing is, parents get upset if their child thinks they're being mean. I understand you feel I'm being mean. I can see why you might think that, right? But I want to reassure you I'm doing this because I care about you. That kind of a dialogue is, children feel secure with that kind of a dialogue from their parents. When children want their parents to be confident enough to set limits. Children don't want parents who don't feel confident to set limits, who feel scared or certainly who set them aggressively, but even they don't want parents who feel too tepid and uncertain about it. They want their parents to feel confident about it because it makes them feel safer and more secure. Okay, so reflective parenting helps parents have lots and lots and lots and lots of different tools for regulating children's distress. I sort of lump emotional distress and stress in the same bucket. The thing that causes long-term problems when you've grown up with adverse child experiences is the stress that comes from it. Okay? It's the inner state of being stressed and emotionally erupted because the mind, body, and brain are all interconnected. So every time we're under stress, it affects us physically. It affects our heart rate, affects our muscle tension, it affects our gut, it affects everything. And so it's okay to be stressed or emotionally upset. It's just not okay when it's not regulated. In fact, we know that a certain amount of stress is actually healthy. It's when you're stressed and there's no one there for you to help you regulate it and help you return back down to normal. So we can tolerate a lot of stress. But what we need, and what children need, because they can't regulate their own distress when it gets too high, what they need is someone else to be there with them. And that's the protective factor. Is the someone else there with them, helping them, understanding what they're going through. Just being together in it. You know, a child who's being bullied at school needs a parent who says something to the effect of, listen, I'm in there with you. We're going to figure this out. I mean, they still might be being bullied, but it's still going to be better for the child. Reflective parenting is also protective against the intergenerational transmission of trauma. Why is that? Well, that's because when parents have been traumatized in their own childhood, it usually means they have not had a reflective other helping them. So they detach from the world, they detach from their own mind, and that's the situation they come to being a parent with. Detached from their own mind, detached from what's going on interpersonally. And so they can't relate to the child and what the child's needs are. You help that parent be reflective. They are going to be able to pass on their reflectivity to their child. They are going to be able to help their child deal with their emotional distress and not act out with aggression, taking drugs or things like that. And that's why it's a protective factor against the intergenerational transmission of trauma. Now, this may sound very simplistic, but we know that children just do better when their parents are less negative, less pessimistic, and less harsh, and they're more positive, optimistic, and kind. And so a lot of what we are teaching parents is how to reframe how they're thinking about their child. I know your child isn't doing well in school, and I know they're giving you problems at home, but you have a child who's really good with other people. When parents are able to really hold on to what is strong about their child, or also about themselves. Now, this is an extreme case, but I had a mother who had terrible, terrible problems with her child. Really acting out kid, really an emotionally dysregulated kid. She started with me having this feeling of, my kid hates me, my kid is a terrible kid, I wish I didn't have her. I mean, that's where she started. And I used to have to say things to her like, you know, the kid would yell at her and then she would yell back at the kid. I mean, sometimes the kid hit her and she'd give the kid a smack back. So she was really reactive. And I used to say to her, and I used to say to her, you know, I think the reason get so angry with your child is because you really care about your child. Your child's acting up and you're frightened. What's she going to be like out there in the world? You really feel like you have to control her behavior and make her act well so that she can get along with other people. And that was my inroad into her. I had to learn to reframe her behavior in a positive way to gain access into her trusting that I had something really valuable to offer her. And this is what I'm always encouraging parents to do about themselves and about their children. We can't empathize with our child unless we empathize with ourselves. And I want to end here by just saying that I believe all parents want to do their best. I don't care about what actions they're taking. I believe they all want to do their best. They love their children and they want their children to do well. So I think of reflective parenting as like no blame parenting. Never blame a parent for what they're doing. Never be judgmental about why they're doing it. Because there's an inroad for you to find a way to be empathic with that parent so that you can understand and get to the point of saying something like this to yourself. If I were in that situation, I might be just like that parent. Now, I'm not saying you agree with the parent or what they're doing or anything like that. But that position of being able to say, if I were in that situation, I might be the same way, is going to give you an avenue into connecting up with even a very challenging parent. And that's what we want. We need an avenue in. We want our parents to trust us that we have something to offer them. Anyhow, I think I'll end there and take questions.
Class that you
Yes,
offer?
thank you.
Oh, sure.
That was-
I just
my-
asked about the
that's my
parenting
favorite
class.
question. Right, okay. So the parenting classes. Okay, so the parenting classes it's a 12-week class, 12 consecutive sessions for 90 minutes each. And we have a curriculum for the class. And the curriculum is all designed to deal with the least stressful kinds of situations first, so the parents can kind of, get their feet wet and learning how to be reflective. So there's a topic for each week, and the topics range from, like maybe in the beginning, it's temperament. This is the big thing, We all have a temperament, an inborn temperament, and understanding your child's temperament, like some kids are more sensitive, some kids are more self-sufficient, some kids are more reactive, whatever, and we each have our own temperament. So that's like the beginning. And then we build up to things that are a little more and more stressful. So, how do you deal with your kid's emotional distress? And then how do you deal with anger and conflict, those kinds of things. So those are kind of a little bit like generic topics in which reflectivity really matter. But the actual class talks about the day-to-day kinds of concerns that parents are having. I can't get my 13-year-old to take a shower, right? My 3-year-old only wants to eat hot dogs, whatever the thing is. My 7-year-old is still sleeping in bed with us. Right? Okay, these are the topics. These are the things that parents talk about. So that's what comes up in the classes. For training to become a trainer, to become a facilitator of a group is a training process. There's a 2-day workshop that we run that introduces you to, goes way, way, way more into depth about reflective parenting, and then does a lot of role playing around what comes up in groups. That's level 1. Then level 2 is actually running a group. I mean, I would love for the Nathanson family, putting the plug, love for the Nathanson Family Resiliency Center to get trained in reflective parenting and run those groups here. But so that's what the second level of training is actually running a reflective parenting group. And once you're trained, then you can run it. We do it as a dyad, 2 people running the group, and because a lot of issues come up, so it's often helpful. Yes, there's a very manual. It's not manualized in the sense of this is what you do to answer, this question or that question, but it's manualized in getting clinicians to become reflective themselves, so that but it's manualized in the sense that for each session we have particular role-playing exercises we do. It's very interactive. It's very experiential for parents. And the benefit of it being in a group is I believe that parenting is not a solo activity. Parenting is really designed to be done in a community of parents. And this gives parents a chance to help each other and to be helped by other parents as well. And so that's what the training involves, is learning about the curriculum and how to do that. Anything else?
Like a dose response.
Yes, there's a dose response. I like that.
Well,
in
like,
fact,
if I could just,
yeah.
to clarify,
yeah.
so, if you have other caregivers or people watching your kids or other family members who might actually be better at reflective parenting, not always worse, what is that balance like?
Well, I like to, it's interesting because later on in the day today I'm going to be giving a talk to some older women who are grandparents. And I like to say that everyone in the family is going to have a reaction to how you are raising your child. And this is one of the things we talk about in our reflective parenting program, is how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that your mother, your mother-in-law, your sister has an opinion about how you're parenting? Because ultimately you are the parent, and we have to help parents feel more confident about that. And I'd like to help grandparents figure out a way to be reflective with their children so they can help their child parent. Because no parent wants a grandparent to say, I can't believe you're giving him a second ice cream cone, or I can't believe your kid is still sleeping in bed with you. That's not helpful. So I don't know if that's answering your question.
It's more like, let's say they spend, 2 half days with this person and then a day or 2 with this other person, or then they go to preschool.
I see what you're saying. Yes, yes,
and different
yes.
people have different
Yes, yes,
amounts of
yes.
reflectivity.
Yes. Well, who's ever reflective with the child, it's better for the child. So if parents aren't reflective, but there's a nanny or a grandparent or a daycare center that's reflective, that's going to be better for the child. I don't think anyone's ever studied, if you have 2 days versus 3 days, it's not. But one of the things we do at Reflective Communities is we work with all people involved in the care of children. So we work with, we do reflective supervision for home visitors. We've actually run reflective program in a residential treatment setting. We do reflective teacher training. So we try to make a reflective process for the whole community of caregivers. So,
I think we have to wrap up.
Okay,
But
that's-
thank you so much for your talk. It was really, really
Thank you.
wonderful. And our next seminar is going to be on December 6th with Richard Cohen on early childhood mental health consultation.
and Richard Cohen is trained in reflective parenting.